if you hand over too much data to the government or to large companies all the time, what happens in 30 years' time from now when we are much older than we are today? And who knows who might be elected in 30 years' time? You will see over and over again this same line that appears on Meta and X and TikTok in particular. Like, the regime press isn't covering their story. And then you go and look at, they are all covering it. It's on literally front page news everywhere. But it's a war between models. But like the idea that anyone in alternative media is just these honest truth sayers, rather than people that also create YouTube channels that are explicitly designed to sell you any old crap and just trying to get you to click on their clickbaity headlines. The liberal side of the argument didn't really care because I think they assumed they'd always swing them in their direction.
Yeah.
And now they've suddenly realized, especially in the last year, since Elon Musk took over X, that that's not a given at all.
Do you want to win a signed copy of The People vs. Tech by Jamie Bartlett? Well, make sure you share this podcast somewhere publicly and put a link in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed and you'll be entered in the draw. Enjoy the podcast. So, hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am delighted to be joined by Jamie Bartlett, author of The People vs. Tech, the Missing Crypto Queen, creator of the podcast of the same name, author of the Substack How to Survive the Internet, and all-round campaigner against the awful ways which technology is ruining our life.
Not a campaigner, truth speaker.
Truth speaker, yes. Well, much in the same thing these days, as I'm sure we'll get on to. So I read your book, The People vs. Tech, while I was researching my first book, Brexit, the Establishment Civil War, because I felt like the Brexit vote was a moment where everybody missed the point. Like the campaign happened and everybody started screaming about Russian bots, and nobody talked about the massive impact of targeted ad campaigns and how technology could be exploited by bad political actors. I felt like that was a footnote of the whole thing, and I thought that was the biggest lesson that came out of Brexit and of Trump. So yeah, some of the stuff in your book really helped me shape some of those ideas and get my head around it.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, I back in 2017, I actually interviewed Alexander Nix, who was the CEO of Cambridge Analytica. Spent a lot of time looking into all of that, and I had the same feeling that it was that even within the subject of targeted advertising, some of it was also snakeskin stuff. But everyone was so obsessed with the political story of the day that they didn't stop to think, everyone's doing this Cambridge Analytica stuff though. And the technology of targeted advertising is only ever going to improve. What is that going to mean for elections? Forget about who won or lost in 2016, US, UK, elsewhere. Something fundamental is changing about how elections are working. And why aren't we talking about that? Why aren't we trying to understand if there's a sort of systemic risk to the integrity of elections? And it's really quite frustrating, to be honest, because some of the fault there, I think, sits with the sort of the liberal side of the argument, who, when Barack Obama was doing some of this stuff, never thought, I wonder what happens when the people we disagree with do the same. I wonder whether this is actually good. When it was reported back in, I don't know when, 2010 or 2011, that the decisions that Google could theoretically make about the order of its search results on political candidates could swing something like 10 or 15% of the world's elections, the liberal side of the argument didn't really care because I think they assumed they'd always swing them in their direction.
Yeah.
And now they've suddenly realized, especially in the last year, since Elon Musk took over X, that that's not a given at all. And now it's kind of a bit late to start doing anything about it. So they're racing to catch up and the EU Commission's demanding Musk hands over information about the algorithm. That should have already been in place as a law 10 years ago. And then it would have been established for now, and we'd be like, oh, you know how this works.
Yeah.
You've got to basically show us how your algorithms work. That's how we do things around here, rather than, oh my God, the right wing are doing incredibly well. We need to quickly do something about it.
Yeah.
Because it also then loses some legitimacy.
Yeah.
It makes it political rather than it's about this whole system. So it's, I don't know, I don't want to be too like, oh, I complained about this in 2012 and not this. Who wants to hear that? We are where we are, but it is a source of frustration. And I think the message I always try to get out there is don't just blame the guys you disagree with. Don't just blame the radical right. Think, what about the whole system? Am I also part of the problem, maybe?
Yeah.
You know, those of us who, well, not me, because I really avoid this, but the people on the left who steam into really, really angry online arguments, stop for a second and think, am I helping? Or am I just stirring the pot more here and getting everyone angrier?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think quite a lot of the time the answer is they're making a lot of people angrier. And I think the point you've made there about think about what will happen when people who you disagree with have this power is a really, really fantastic way to put it. And I mean, I've been making this argument since people were calling for any sort of censorship of social media or regulation of it. And I'm like, okay, but just like think about what happens when those levers to control what a society sees are in the hands of someone that you don't like. Like, if you're a big Corbyn fan and you're horrified by the potential of Prime Minister Nigel Farage, what happens when he has that kind of sway? Like, would you be as comfortable with his government doing it as like the current administration or like a Jeremy Corbyn administration or
100%. Like no one seems to realise that. And the entire sort of logic of free expression, for example, is actually to sort of protect minority opinion. You lose that power, and the majority starts to enforce their will on the minority. That's what free expression is really about. And people sometimes, I don't know, don't seem to understand that free expression is there to protect that. And I'm staggered that people don't think more as well about this question when it comes to data and privacy. If you hand over too much data to the government or to large companies all the time, what happens in 30 years' time from now when we are much older than we are today? And who knows who might be elected in 30 years' time? God knows, given what's going on at the moment and how quickly things are changing. What happens if they have access to absolutely vast amounts of data about every single thing of our lives and our children's lives, and they start seeking out like little signs of disloyalty towards the regime? Because who knows? And this is the story also of IBM in the Netherlands during the Nazis, building technology for one reason, for like various forms of collecting vast amounts of data for census reasons and stuff like that, including your ethnicity and your religion, falls into the hands of the Nazis, who then have a database of every Jew and where they live. And then I know it seems like a really exaggerated example, but I just think people don't always think about how fast politics can change. Yeah, and in what directions it can change.
Yeah, and we've seen it as well in, for example, people's dislike of Just Stop Oil has allowed the government to criminalize protest. That people's disagreement with one particular group has allowed the government to take away part of that fundamental right that we just forever would have, you go back 25 years and say, they're going to arrest protesters. You'd say, well, that sounds like a dictatorship to me. People's political opinions shouldn't sway the principle based on who it is that we're talking about. And I think this brings us really nicely to a quote that I sort of got out of the book. And you say, in some circles, it's become a patronizing new orthodoxy to say that stupid bros have been duped by misinformation. Do you think misinformation is better or worse than it was when you wrote that? And do you think we're better at spotting it, or do you think nothing's changed, or has it got worse?
Yeah, that came from a view, and it is informed by some of the literature as well, that people who consider themselves to be sort of highly educated and well-informed are often as prone to satisfying, forms of information. Like they are just as likely to believe things that they want to believe, and all the other cognitive biases that we have. That there was this sense for sure that it was sort of, oh, you idiots are just believing what the Russian bots are saying, without any sort of introspection about maybe I also believe stuff, but just because it feels warm, because I like The Guardian, so I'll just trust what they say instead and think I'm really informed about it. I mean, but the reality is about something like fake news, which is one of the worst phrases ever created. And I know it's weirdly sort of created by, I don't know if Trump created it. I don't think he did, but he obviously popularized it. But then it was also used by everyone to accuse everybody else of being ill-informed or whatever, yeah. Most of the fake news that you think, it's not so much single stories that are fake. What tends to happen, and I spent several weeks and months with Tommy Robinson, following him all around Europe back in 2015 and 2016. A whole other book I wrote called Radicals, about different political movements that I felt were kind of bubbling up, and radical environmentalism. I shut down a coal mine with some radical sort of Earth First type movement. Traveled all across Europe with Tommy Robinson, but actually with him, on the planes sitting next to him. And all sorts of other groups, psychedelic, mushroom takers, all of that. It's really cool, really interesting work. Most of the way that, let's say, the Tommy Robinsons of this world construct their view of what's going on is not just because they are reading false news stories. They will typically be reading truthful, accurate news stories from fairly trustworthy outlets, but they will be piling one on top of the other. So they'll create a narrative of the world based on sort of collating and bombarding themselves with the same version of what's going on in the world over and over again. But the actual stories themselves, read in isolation, are often correct.
Yeah.
But it's about how you construct that, and whether you're seeing different views on what happened and alternative stories. The problem then is the minute you start saying it's fake, you just believe fake news, they can say, yeah, but that's from the BBC, and this story's from Le Monde, and that one's from the New York Times. So what's fake about that? Why are you patronizing me? So it's not about often fake news is not individually fake. It might create a slightly misleading narrative about what's happening, but that's quite different, and you talk about that differently in a non-patronizing, you just believe any old fake news. Now, things have got a bit muddier because, Elon Musk is just literally sharing completely false stories. But one of the things I have also noticed about that whole, I think what's going on at the moment is just the incredible power of anecdotes and videos of invasions and London's fallen and all these sort of tropes that get added to that. Very often you will see a video of at the border or whatever it is, but what is added to that is London's fallen, civilization's under threat, and that gets shared and you see it again and again and again and again. And that is partly, I think, the power of video. One of the things that isn't really discussed, the kind of meta trend, is how much more of our social content is video relative to text compared to 10 years ago. The majority of traffic now is video.
Yeah.
And video is way more emotive.
Short form as well.
Short videos, they're powerful, they're emotional, you get really angry when you see them in a way you don't reading the written word. And it's that single change, I think, has transformed politics to make it so much more emotive and angry and, oh my God, look at these crazy people. You'll get a single video of, and I don't like to use these examples, but if you go onto X, you'll see them constantly, libs of TikTok, some kind of absolutely radical liberal with pink hair.
Find the craziest.
So you don't find the craziest people, and that's called nut picking, and make it appear that that is how every liberal thinks. Every liberal is happy to see biological men compete in women's sports. That's how crazy they all are.
Yeah.
But you attach that message to an emotive video, share it enough times, it starts to really sink in with people. And I think the right has done better than the left at caricaturing the opposition over the last 4 years. And I think video is a key way that's happened. Sorry, I don't even remember what the question was.
No, that's all right. It's interesting you say that. I think what might have happened in that case is partially because of Trump in America and Brexit in the United Kingdom, in that the opposite of what like the left as a whole would believe broadly, obviously broad strokes here, is so like abhorrent to people. Trump and Brexit and the rejection of like the liberal globalized worldview, that they will seem to line up not in support of the craziest opinions of the furthest like left people, but they will just stand up in opposition to whatever it is that the other side are doing. And then that has sort of built this arms race where people are like, well, I'm definitely not with them, is much stronger than I'm definitely with them. It's I feel like the rejection of things is almost a stronger emotion in our politics. Like the opposition to certain things is a stronger emotion and driving force than the support of something.
Interesting. I think I agree, and I think you see it in quotes like "this annoys all the right people," and I sometimes think that the Trump strategy at the moment has been to make an announcement to intentionally inflame the other side, to make them look wild and crazy. Like the purpose is to get the other side furious and to talk about it. And then, that's free advertising for you.
Yeah.
But because it is such a sport, it's my team versus your team in sports now. The more that they scream, the more your guys are behind you. And when I see certain headlines and speeches and policy announcements, I almost feel like the purpose is to annoy the other side rather than to actually promote something positive of their own.
Yeah.
Which is a really destructive place to be, and is probably partly a function of this sort of rapid, everything always, all the time media ecosystem that we have.
100%. And I think it's also part of the hot take. Opposing something is really easy to get likes on. If someone say, I don't know, Keir Starmer proposes something, it's really easy for someone to put up this is just another awful thing from Keir Starmer video.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what people want to hear. The Labour, they've screwed it again. It's another bad decision.
Yeah, right. And you can clip it. You can clip everything into 10 seconds, 15, 20, 30, 50 seconds, however long you want. And then you can put out just a clipped up version. I think the fact that the ability to collect, edit, and reshare everything that has ever been said over the last 10 years in perpetuity now, basically allows you to accuse everyone else of being a hypocrite, because you can always find a clip or a quote that contradicts another clip or a quote that they've said before.
Are people just hypocrites? Like, because there's always a twist.
I think the reality is you can't not be a hypocrite and live, and certainly not as a politician. Because politics is about some form of compromise. You make promises that are actually harder to keep than you thought. And it's all about whether you think people are acting in good faith or not, really. People have to change their minds. But you were a hypocrite. I bet I could find something that you wrote once
100%.
that you then said something different to later, and I'll put them together in a video. I say, why should you? Joyce just, he says one thing here, another thing there. He's a hypocrite. He can't be trusted. This was not possible 20 years ago. Like, it was important to be able to forget sometimes what people said, because if everyone's a hypocrite, everyone's a liar, what is politics? Then it's a sport, like, yeah, sure, my guy's a liar, but he's a smarter liar than your guys. Like, the idea that I don't mind my political leader being a liar because everyone's a liar. I just admire the strength, or he's a wiser liar than you are. And again, I feel like that is these are all things that are really difficult to really pin down and quantify. And I know it feels sometimes like scattergun, all these different things going on at once, and it's hard to say exactly what's being caused by what. I see it as just this sort of clash between, we build up a political system over 150 years or whatever, a sort of modern representative democracy with regulated press and, an informed civil society, and we build all these little systems of checks and balances, and then digital technology just comes through and just basically says, I'm going to totally smash this up and change how all of this works. Because it was all premised on certain types of information being shared in certain ways and what the public could consume at what time. And it just feels like a great collision between a representative analog democracy that kind of worked quite well and digital technology that doesn't kind of follow the same logic. And this is why I think we see so many different things happening in so many different ways, and it can be hard to make sense of it all.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of a quote, actually. Goes, I'm going to butcher it, but something like, traditions are solutions to problems we've forgotten about. And I think that what you said there about the analog society and this analog representative democracy, for example, in terms of how we get our information, like, if you're from Northern Ireland and you lived through the 70s and 80s, as my parents did, not a single person in that country believed what the BBC said. It was a propaganda outlet, unless you're like a hard dyed-in-the-wool unionist. And even then, like, you've got to know. And maybe people just thought, well, okay, we've got our suspicions about it. But everyone that was the news. That's where you got the news from. That was our information diet. And in many senses, the BBC in the United Kingdom, I'm sure, was exactly the same. There's stuff that people have lied about on the news. There's things that the BBC editorial team maybe didn't choose to publish because it was contradictory to the views of the government at the time, or the people who were BBC directors. And there's always been like bias and propaganda in our media diet, but everyone had the same media diet. It was like the 6 o'clock news, radio, maybe UTV or ITV, Channel 4. But, there was a couple of lenses through which you got your information about the world. Maybe you'd go out and seek other things. If you were really, really into it, you'd read some books and get like a different view. But broadly, I think that meant that people had this similar informational diet, and it actually made it a lot easier to have a much more cohesive conversation about politics and exist peacefully and harmoniously as a society at whole. I think
that almost like an agreed upon myth, that the myth is essential somehow for the smooth running of society. Doesn't mean the myth is perfect, because the BBC shouldn't do any of those things, and could still be just as effective without doing those things, in terms of being able to be genuinely holding governments to account and genuinely trying to cover every difficult subject. But still, it's then packaged up in a way that's digestible and understandable. So
I think we're in this position where it's literally is it a few good men? It's like, you want the truth, like, you can't handle the truth. Like, can society handle actually knowing what's happening? The amount of times, and I feel like it's accelerating the things you'll be like, hang on a second, that was always the way that worked, and you'll discover something that wouldn't have happened because of
you see, the problem is, when you're in this kind of debate, I'll come up against someone who'll say, "Oh, but the BBC is a propaganda wing and is a part of the legacy media and part of the regime media or part of the corporate media," and we'll say X or TikTok or Meta is the only place to get the truth. That is also complete shit. I mean, because that doesn't necessarily give you a clearer view of what's going on at all.
No.
Like the alternative press has its own very particular biases. The idea that is an unfiltered window into what's really happening in the world is completely mad. I mean, and I don't mean it in the patronizing way of like, oh, the idiots are being misinformed. It's too much contradictory information coming at us all the time. It's impossible to really make sense of what's going on. And some of it is just flat out lies. Some of it is the alternative press, which calls the mainstream press corporate media. They are the corporate media. They are the ones that are like strictly for profit, like have particular incentives about pushing certain types of information at you for profit-making purposes. Why is that a true reflection of what's really going on?
Yeah.
Like you will see over and over again this same line that appears on Meta and X and TikTok in particular. Like, the regime press isn't covering their story. And then you go and look at, they are all covering it. It's on literally front page news everywhere. But it's a war between models. It's like Elon Musk clearly just wants to undermine corporate media. He hates it for lots of reasons. But parts of it, some justified, some entirely based probably on business reasons because he's their direct competitors for dollars.
Yeah.
But like the idea that anyone in alternative media is just these honest truth sayers, rather than people that also create YouTube channels that are explicitly designed to sell you any old crap with no regard or no regulation whatsoever about trying to tell you the truth and just trying to get you to click on their clickbaity headlines. I just don't understand why that is a clearer model of getting at the truth. Or, like, you know what I mean? Alex Jones, who I did an interview on his show.
Oh, you've been on into it?
I've been on his show. I did a debate with him about 9/11 and 7/7. Yeah, a long time ago. I wrote a report completely in my own time about how conspiracy theories were working and how they were spreading and what I thought was wrong about 9/11, conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. Gets me on the show, I get a phone call saying, "Well, do you want to go on the Alex Jones show?" And I was like, "All right, fine, I'll go on that."
Damn straight. Go
Yeah, great on there.
in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was even before. It was before Sandy Hook. It was before all of that stuff. So just
Still massive.
he was still big. I mean,
He was like on more radio, I think, than he was.
Yeah, they were still filming. It was still filmed back then. I think it was after radio. I mean, it was still huge. And I thought, I'll just debate anyone. I mean, I don't care. But the accusation, like he'd been through the funding I worked for a think tank at that time called Demos. And this was published by Demos.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, hand on heart, I received no money for this. I did it on my own time, so I thought it was important. No editors were telling me what to write. I wrote exactly what I felt. He'd gone through all the historic funding documents of Demos, found that we'd once received money from the education department to do a report on something else. Accuses me of being part of the deep state conspiracy. I've been through your funding. And no matter what I said, you just wouldn't believe it. And it was good click to hear. And he was selling like silver capsules as cure for cancer. And I'm the one who's I'm the one who's the liar working for the deep state. And I just thought, oh man, this is weird what's going on here. Nothing I say is going to change his mind.
Yeah.
So I have big problems with I think places like the BBC do need to change quite a lot in response to this. I think they need to really open up. They need to ask harder questions. They don't often ask the hard questions of the reports they do.
No.
They don't always, they're often not open, I don't think, enough about how they prioritize certain stories and order certain stories and which ones they give prominence to. And they should record and publish the editorial meetings that they have when they're making judgments about which stories to cover and which ones not to. You've got to start opening it up a bit, because it's becoming out of keeping with how so much of us get our media. The big execs should go and do 3-hour-long podcasts on Joe Rogan about it. The BBC should change in response to this. So I'm not saying BBC is perfect and the BBC is this and that and alternative press is rubbish.
No, but I feel like they used to do more solid journalism than they do now. I feel like there was a period, and I don't know, maybe this is just because I'm checking out from listening to him, because I increasingly just go, that's not true. That's not true. And then I can't even read the rest of the story because I'm like, I don't, and I've seen too many examples of them. And this is just me being cynical. I've seen too many examples where I'm like, I know that that's not true. And I know that you know that that's not true. And yet it's still your editorial line. Like, for example, and I use this example a lot. I'll use this example in my book. I can't remember what date it was. 2017, I think. There was a lot of accusations that the Assad regime in Syria had been using chemical weapons on their own people. And over a weekend, with no parliamentary vote, the British government used the accusations that they'd used chemical weapons on their own people in order to bomb a lot of Syria, right? And there was a guy called Robert Fisk, Channel 4 award-winning journalist, who was on the ground in Syria saying, there is no chemical weapons attacks. This is like propaganda, right? And fair enough that in the heat of war and in a foreign country, in a place like Syria, it's difficult to ascertain the truth. The BBC wrote an article about how online disinformation experts were undermining truth by claiming that there was no chemical weapons attacks. Whilst Robert Fisk was like, this guy was like a decade-long war correspondent. This is not some random guy making things up. Then the OECW, I think it is, or OPCW, who are like the international body on chemical weapons. They came out and were like, yeah, no, there was no chemical weapons used on the ground at that time. Other times, perhaps. And I just thought, well, why is the BBC publishing an article about why online disinformation is really dangerous, whilst there's quite a lot of like actual discussion about whether something is actually true? And I always just go back to this as the perfect example of like where they've become flawed is that a real journalist would say, this is what we've been told by the regime, by say the UN, by other people. Then they could go, no, some people are claiming that this didn't happen.
I couldn't sleep to that example.
I know it's a very specific example, but
all I can really answer with that is I've made multiple reports for the BBC now, and I get lectured at by a lot of people about how the BBC works who've never worked for the BBC, who've never been in it. My mates from back home constantly telling me what really happens at the BBC, and I'm saying to them, you trust me, like we've been mates for 25 years. Do you want to ask me? No, but you're all right. But the rest of them, they're doing this, that, and the other. And I say, I've done so many things for them. Would you like my opinion about how it works? They're not interested. Just not interested.
Right, well then...
The BBC, well, yeah, I'm freelance, so I don't represent the BBC. Now, I'm allowed to say stuff. The BBC, like, just in my experience... and I don't know about, I can't say about your...
No, I did. There
are lots of things that I disagree with how they do it, and I think they need to be really careful when it comes to calling things misinformation, disinformation. Like, sort of BBC Verify makes me very nervous. Like, we're going to verify what's true for you and what's not. I mean, I would never do that personally. But like, for example, we really were the first place to expose a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme at quite considerable risk. This is what the Missing Crypto Queen was. Like, big legal risks, threats to people, like threats to us as a result of it. But we thought we can actually try to save people from losing more money to a scam like this. Cost a lot of money. We got the constant accusation of you're liars, you're fake news, you're corporate media, trying to undermine everything that we said. I can only speak the amount of care that went into the editorial decisions and the legal decisions and checking every single thing a million times because of how big the corporation is and the reach that it has. No one else really would have been able to do that. So, like, there are times when it does brilliant investigations and it's really like straight at the truth. Screw you all, we're going to publish it. And it's going to be risky and we're going to get threatened by lawyers and we're going to get threatened by gangsters, but we are going to push this out there because we think it's in the public interest. Now, all I can say is the BBC does a hell of a lot of that stuff as well. And the danger, one of the risks is that when we do that, everyone says fake news, liars, and it just kind of undermines the really good stuff, which is why I think it does need to be really careful with some of its other sort of accusing things of being misinformation. So I totally get your take on it as well, and I do get very nervous for the same. But those sorts of stories make me really nervous. Yeah, I'm like, ugh. But I get sad when I see it undermines some incredibly good work by really smart people and really dedicated lawyers and editors who really just their life's goal is to get the truth out to people.
Yeah.
So I think the BBC's just got to work on how to improve. And I just think we don't want to throw out regulated, sort of professionally guided journalism as a result of all of what's going on. You know what I mean? Because then we're in a world where all we have is X and TikTok and Facebook. And
and like you said, I think the other problem is that it's that you can't see all the takes. Like, it's just too much. Like people, their bubble or their feed is this little focus of this big on a mile wide canvas.
Yeah,
and that's all you're seeing is just the.
And it's truth. And it's the truth. That little feed, that little vision, that little camera shot of this bit. It's like looking at the whole table here.
Yeah,
getting your phone. That is an accurate depiction of this.
That's that bit.
But maybe you're not seeing
all the extra stuff. And so at the end of the People versus Tech, break the ad model was one of your suggestions for fighting back against big tech. That we had to find some way of having ourselves not bound where the content on platforms would be open to policing by the advertisers that were hoping to spend money on the platform. And I thought that was a great idea.
Well, it was also the idea that the advertising is what determines basically the recommender model, kind of the engagement-based algorithms, which are pushing content at you that they think you're going to click on because it will sell more ads.
Yeah.
It's the relationship between the content you see and the fact that the whole thing is driven by advertising, which was for me the original sin. It was engagement-based ranking algorithms was the sort of original sin of social media, where it went from chronological feeds where you are just seeing content in the order in which it is posted by the people who you follow, to we'll build some clever algorithms to feed you stuff that you're going to click on because you're going to like it, which is really good because we'll sell more ads.
Yeah.
So that was like, how do we break the original sin? Yeah, well, maybe there's but I don't know how still, because it's not economically viable.
I mean, well, Elon Musk has had the first seeming attempt at, he was all last year was very much like, fuck the advertisers. We'll run it the way we want. How is his attempt to not be beholden to advertisers go?
Yeah, I got to be honest, I hadn't predicted that in the place of recommender algorithms to drive ad clicks, in place of that would be a multi-billionaire buying a platform as basically a propaganda tool. That was not my vision of what would replace it. So I I really don't know, because it's for 10 years. It has engagement-based algorithms has been the driving force of all social media platforms, and it's the reason we're so hooked on them, why we get sucked into sort of rabbit holes, and the liberals are as guilty as this as anyone else, or anyone complains about it. It's the reason, like, we can't stop scrolling, which is then bad in lots of other ways. And so I was just trying to figure, like, is there another way? And the benevolent dictator purchasing it and saying, no, we're just going to let information flow to you now, completely free of this, was not what I had in mind, because he's obviously feeding information for other reasons in certain ways that get you to click, especially on the For You feed, which is essentially just loads of similar stuff about how civilization is collapsing.
Yeah. You know, I have a theory about what's happened with X, and I would love your take on it.
Please.
I think that the general populace, especially in Britain and America, I can't speak as much to other parts of the world because I just don't know, is way more conservative than people realize. I think that, especially with the aging population, that prior to Musk buying X, that there had been, like, I don't know exactly how to quantify this, but some left-wing liberal bias existing in the way that, like, Facebook, Twitter, etc., had been set up, just because of as a function of the ideologies of the people who had first set them up. Like, you know, that's just going to happen. And I feel like what might have happened to a certain extent, now I've seen people suggesting that the right has been boosted on X under Musk's
I mean,
you know, thing. But
I think it's quite a decent amount of evidence for that.
Yeah, I haven't gone like super deep into that. I just haven't had time. But my feeling is that it's not so much right is being boosted as much as it is that people are more conservative than we realize. And what's happened is the rails have been taken off, and now people who were more conservative and perhaps didn't go on those platforms because it's all just the libs anyway, have now flocked to it, and the opinions of the broader population have just sort of been, like, unleashed, as for lack of a better way of putting it. I feel like, in a way, we're seeing more of the reality of what the country might think now.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I don't completely disagree with that, because I think certainly it's totally true, I think, to say that for a long time, the majority of politicians and journalists and big business leaders on sort of cultural, social questions were way to the left compared to the general population. No doubt about that. And that's one of the criticisms, I think, of the BBC, that it was never in time able to sort of do something about that. And I know they tried sometime, but, like, understand that and report on things that reflected that somehow. So I think that's totally true. But more than anything, it's the sort of tone with which debates now take place rather than the subject matter of them. You know, it's because the opinion of the general public doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's also being driven by these platforms, and has to a very large degree over the last 15 years. So it's a sort of to and fro between the platforms and people's opinions. And I think, but equally, if you look at certain opinion polls, they're like, Elon Musk is incredibly unpopular.
In the UK, Paul.
Yeah, in the UK, yeah. And I think his favorability in the US is pretty low as well. That doesn't, but equally, I think you're right still about opinion. I mean, the opinion of the public on certain questions is to the right of, the majority of the press. Yeah. So I think that's definitely true, but it's unleashed in a way that is, like, furious, angry, like civilization's about to collapse, it's brink of civil war, like catastrophic, constant catastrophic language and feeling. And that's, I think, more of a function of what's been going on online. And the sort of how we consume information, constantly bombarded, terrible things. You turn on any social media and it is just story after story after story of terrible things, establishment stitch-ups, legacy press lying to you, like non-stop, all the time. And that is creating a sort of built-up anger and frustration, because you could still have the same debates, but them being slightly calmer, maybe slightly more constructive as well.
Yeah. Like, is there a way that social media can exist without this push towards the extremes? So, like, one of the things I wrote about a lot in my Brexit book was how all of these platforms push people towards extremes in a certain extent. Like, if you're on, like, people don't talk about YouTube that much as something that is radicalizing people, right? But if you're on YouTube and you're looking at running videos, you know how to get from couch to 5K, or sofa to 5K, or how do I get under 6 minutes a kilometer, or you're searching for anything, what's the proper running technique? Then you'll start to get videos about 5Ks, 10Ks.
Oh, yeah.
Then you'll start to get videos about marathons, ultra marathon runners, like people who, like that guy Henry Moores, who ran from Dubai to Riyadh for the Tommy Robinson, or not Tommy Robinson, Tyson Fury. Right. For the fight, the Fury Usyk fight.
Yeah.
But like, it will push you down any avenue towards, like, oh, you like this? Oh, here, have some of this.
Yeah.
Oh, you like that? Oh, how about some of this? The way that these things are constructed seems to push us towards the more and more extremes, because that's what people will click on.
Well, that's what I was saying about engagement-based algorithms.
But like, it's not possible to build like a timeline-based one, because I know we used to have, but that we're.
I mean, way past it. But I know, and I don't know, because I don't know if there's one that can be built that way that's economically viable.
It's not even that.
You know what I mean?
Like, how can you? The point is to go on and see the updates from people you follow. But people post 25 updates a day,
right?
And you follow 2,000 people.
You have to. The volume of content now means that you have to order it in some way.
Yeah.
So there probably are ways of doing design tweaks which don't exist now, and this is partly what the new Meta and X policy is, doing sort of design tweaks that could say, let's take the example of eating disorders. They had to change it, and I hope they keep the change in, but is there any reason for a 14-year-old girl to be bombarded non-stop over and over with content about diets? And this is what had been happening to a lot of people, including Molly Russell, who killed herself in 2017. She starts reading up on diets and eating disorders, and then it's just more of the same. But so her entire feed is just full of this. And given how incredibly sophisticated these algorithms are, was there not a way that they could have said, this 14-year-old girl, because we understand our customers very well, has clicked on 500 posts in the last hour about really dangerous eating habits. Do you think we should stop serving some of those to her now? Why not? Yeah, of course you should stop. But they wouldn't. They just keep serving it and serving it. So there are clearly design interventions you could make. It gets difficult with politics, because you don't want to be like, oh, you've watched 20 right-wing videos. I don't think you should watch any more at E. But there are probably non-political ones. I'm the same. Like, I've got into anti-ultra-processed food. Lately. I'm so radicalized. I'm so radicalized by now, because all I ever see is more videos. The crap with me.
You're like, that thing you do every day? Oh, well, see how that's poisoning you.
Yeah, exactly. You use non-stick pans, you idiot. Why aren't you eating 12 eggs a day? That's the...
So you don't filter your water? Look, you're not dead yet.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's a really useful exercise. Because if you get people onto that subject and see how they can be radicalized on any subject on earth, and then say, that could be happening with politics, you know?
Yeah.
You might be getting angrier because it's the same process. I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but like, do you think maybe you're consuming too much? And I like, one really simple thing for me is you can toggle on X and to some extent TikTok and to some extent on Instagram between who you follow, posts from who you follow. It's still going to be ordered in a certain way and one's recommended to you. And if you toggle between the For You tab on X and people you follow on X and look at the difference, look at what different content you're being given. Because the amazing thing about social media is you can also have access to other people's media consumption. You could be like, you know what, the guys that are really angry on the right at the moment, maybe I could try and understand them better. Like, why are they so annoyed? Why don't I just keep calling them idiots?
No one does that.
I have tried. I know.
You're an exception.
I know they don't.
Really does.
I know they don't. But what I'm saying is, why don't you consume the media they're consuming for a few weeks? See how you feel about it. See what you think. See if it changes your mind. See if it gets you some perspective on where they're coming from. And for one of the first times ever, like, we can do that. We can actually do that. People don't do it.
No.
So I didn't say that.
And
So
you know,
it
there's
is-
this awful psychological effect that tends to take hold is that if you then start to consume that, you don't see the merits in it. You only see the flaws, and that you start to further caricature the other side. Because I've been down this road, like, right. So I wrote my book. I voted Remain. If I went back, I'm not sure exactly, but I'd probably go Remain again because of the shit show they've made of it. But I after that, and then the Trump win, I was like, wow, I really need to reevaluate like my media like consumption and just like how I look at the world, because I don't think half the country are Nazis. I don't think they're like screaming like racist, horrible people, because loads of them that I know that. You know, I don't know that many Americans, but here I know loads of people that voted for Brexit. Like, and I like them. They're nice people. Yeah. You know, they have the, you know, we've had some, you know, great times. I go in their house sometimes. You know, I've met their family. I play golf with them. Like, they're lovely people. Like, what was the merits there? And then right in the book, I was like, wow, okay, so they have some points, and I actually kind of get what they mean by sovereignty now. And, you know, I still think the people who carry it out are a bunch of liars and charlatans, and they were only backing it primarily for their own pocket and their, you know, the benefit of their donors. But like the people that voted for it, I have a lot of time, sympathy, and understanding for now. And I've attempted to explain these positions to people who were like vehemently and still are like pro rejoin, and just been like, but do you get anything about what people are saying? No, nothing. Just no, they're racist. They're idiots. They're misinformation. Yeah. It's like
But that just makes the problem worse, doesn't it? That's the frustrating thing. And I agree. And one of the problems with social media is it's premised on a fanciful idea of the marketplace of ideas. Like, put all the ideas together, and then you'll see the other person's perspective, and you'll reach a synthesis between your ideas and their ideas. And the reality is that social media doesn't force you just into an echo chamber. It forces you to be exposed to people you disagree with quite a lot. And the problem is, when you're exposed to them in that short, sharp, angry way, you just get more annoyed with them. And that happens both ways. It needs to be really immersive, like writing a book. You really need to get in there and understand why. And I'm going to spend time with the media you're consuming, talk to you, see where you're coming from. That's the only way you ever change your mind about something. Yeah. And social media doesn't allow for that. But the whole, like, Mark Zuckerberg's philosophy is like, we're going to exchange ideas, and, you can come to understand each other. And it's like, no, that's the fundamental premise of that is quite wrong. Sending like tiny missives at each other does not help us understand. It drives us apart. We get angrier and angrier with each other. And it's just it's a fundamental misunderstanding. And I find it, I find it incredibly frustrating. And I don't really know what you do about that. And if the book was an attempt to do it, it seems a bit naive now, really, 2018. It was all quite simple. You know what I mean? Back then. Simple times.
You look back, it's like, oh, you sweet summer child.
Yeah. I'm running a little low. I'm going to really have to leave quite on.
Yeah, I wanted to.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I was going to say we should probably wrap up soon anyway, because you have to go. I wanted to ask one more question then before we go. And what do we go with? Because there's many things. I know. This always happens, don't worry. So, do you think governments are learning how to handle this at all any better than they were in 2018? Do you think they know? Do you think they have any clue what to do? Do you think the people in charge have any modicum of an idea of what to do? Or even more in problems are?
Yeah, what's really going on? I don't know. And I think for better or for worse, democratic governments were trying to sort of inch towards, control put in sort of more content moderation policies around this subject and that subject, and you have access requests, you've got to send this information and we're going to work with you and try and keep the level of online debate somehow under control. And then when, what's happened in the US in the last 3 months, they just now are completely, utterly clueless, just have no idea what to do. I really don't think they've got any idea what to do. Because if they try and enforce the Online Safety Act and start saying, well, we're going to fine you 0.5% of your total revenue if you don't remove this content, most people just say, like, no, you're not. What are you going to do about it? I mean, so I just don't think they have, without the sort of backing of the main party in the US to do that kind of thing, I don't think they know how to do it. And they can't ban these platforms. I mean, no one will take seriously.
Censorship trying to ban one of the big papers.
Yeah,
in the 70s.
and everyone would rightly say, well, we're just turning into China, so what's the point? Like, so they can't do that, and I wouldn't want them to do that.
Yeah.
So,
but TikTok, even with reasonable cause to say maybe this isn't great for our national security, they got the ban got overturned.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. But so I don't know. I think we live with it. And we hope that somehow us, the users, just so much. Like, I think media literacy, obviously everyone says this, but I have honestly been saying this for 15 years. I went into the Department of Education 15 years ago and said, media literacy is the most important subject on the curriculum. And unless you start really teaching it, and I don't mean 30 minutes in a PSHE lesson, I mean it's core, because all the world's information is available to students. The only thing that really matters is how they understand it. This should be like 5 hours a week. This should be, and it is not just about this is how an algorithm works. It is, here are the 15 most common human cognitive biases that we all suffer from, and that all of us are being, to some extent or another, having those biases and those cognitive weaknesses sort of played upon by these companies. And you need to learn them and understand them and know when you are subject to them. And that also means you, Mr. Liberal, like, you are subject to this. And here's how you know, and here's how you recognize it. And it's just never it's never really taken off in the way that it really should have done. Yeah. So I still keep banging the drum on that one. But I'm not entirely sure what we do or where we go.
I think you're probably about right there. Like, I think the way education works is going to have to massively change in the next decade. And that's probably due to the abundance of information available now at the touch of our fingers. Like, it needs to be about how we evaluate and utilize that information rather than just rote learning things. Because that's the class that I still remember from school, how to evaluate a source in history. That's like, I was 13 and it's just lodged in there. 17 years later, still, I could remember everything we went through. Like, okay, this is a picture. Okay, so it's a primary source. It was taken out of time. You can't see it at the frame. You don't know who the thing was. You don't know who was taking it behind you. You know, we went through how you evaluate each sort of source, like primary, secondary, image, film, written, newspaper, anecdote, like... I still remember.
I did and here's where the BBC could be wrong about this. But here's also where Alex Jones could be wrong about this. So you're kind of almost a bit platform neutral with it. Like, apply the same standards to the alternative press and to the BBC and to what you see on Facebook and to what you hear on what you read in the newspaper. What you can't do in terms of teaching media literacy to people is to say, now, here's the BBC and this is trustworthy, okay? And here's the alternative press, and this is usually full of lies. This is how you tell the difference.
Yeah.
That's never going to work. No. Or if we believe, as I do in sort of regulated press, and I can see we're slightly on a different wavelength on that, but that's cool. Is all I ever wanted was apply the same standards to all of it. Sure, these guys get it wrong, but maybe these guys get it wrong sometimes. You shouldn't just believe what the alternative press tells you because they're against the people you don't like.
Yeah.
And but I don't know how we get there, but it feels like, I don't know. The People versus Tech was partly to say the way democracy runs has to change too, but everything else is changing. Everything else, how we consume information, how we communicate with each other, how our companies work, it's all been transformed in 25 years. The way our politics works is kind of the same. It has to change. It has to kind of start matching the tech a little bit. And I think that's the mission. I don't know exactly how that looks. Smarter people than me will figure that out, but I think that's what we've got to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful place to end. Of course, you should know that the only source you can trust is this podcast. Now, if anything, believe nobody. No, I think you're just right. I think everything should be viewed with the same level of skepticism. And there are many great things that come out of legacy journalism. And I only wish they still had the kind of resources that they once did in order to produce the level of journalism that they used to. I think that's probably one of the things we didn't touch on, but the fact that they make way less money now means that they're forced to resort to rapidly written, possibly hastily researched, okay, we'll just go with the line because, we're due to publish in 20 minutes.
And opinioning is cheaper to produce than news. So
real journalism.
You get more opinion, and an opinion is so loaded always. So that's part of the problem. I think if you look at the amount of journalistic output that is actually not journalism, it's just opinion. It's more and more and more every year. So no wonder people don't trust journalists, because they're often just blowhard, loud about, giving you their opinion.
There's very few people in the trenches actually doing investigations anymore, unfortunately. But I know you have to go. So thank you, Jamie. Links for your stuff will be all in the description.
Awesome.
Well,
great to talk to you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, listeners, real quick. Do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out, and you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.